Andrew woke up with a start. He knew what had happened, and his heart sank. The sound of shattering downstairs did the same to his nerves. It had come. After weeks of watching and stalking him, the creature had finally decided to break in. The patio door, made completely of glass, provided it with the perfect entrance. Andrew lay in bed in the blackness, illuminated only by the small amount of light the moon provided through the space between the curtains. He listened for the creature to see if it was inside, secretly praying that everything would be silent. The terrifying cracking of glass under its feet confirmed his worst fear. It had finally made its way into his home. With this crushing realization, Andrew, now shaking, grabbed his baseball bat and crept downstairs. Deeper into the darkness, he was determined to confront the thing once and for all, secretly hoping, though, that it would run away when it saw him, as it normally did. Andrew stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening. At first, all he heard was the cracking of glass under the creature's feet. Then, for the first time, Andrew heard it, breathing heavily, as if its throat was blocked with phlegm. The hideous monster snarled and clicked, gradually getting closer to Andrew. Now, out of the kitchen, the creature was finally off the glass. It walked almost silently now, strangely more agile than it looked, especially considering how clumsily it ran away. Andrew realized what he needed to do. He grasped his weapon tighter and froze, unable to move. He knew he needed to attack it, but he just couldn't. Its teeth, its eyes, its skin, they were human, but not quite. It was in the living room now, and edging closer by the moment. Yet Andrew was still too terrified to move. Even if it didn't have arms, the creature was the embodiment of terror to Andrew. Andrew stood at the bottom of the stairs, shaking. He heard the creature getting ever closer, the sickening sound of its distorted breathing, amplified by the almost pitch-black darkness. It was nearly at him now. He had one chance to kill it, and he wasn't going to waste it. The creature stepped into the doorway to the stairs. Andrew was hidden just to the left. He swung at full force, hitting the thing in the chest with the bat. It staggered back, then stopped and looked at Andrew, its tiny, wild eyes staring into his soul. Andrew felt a deep fear, unlike anything he had ever experienced. The creature then let out a gurgling hiss, baring all of its sickening, deformed teeth in the process. It kicked Andrew in the guts, winding him. He fell to the floor in pain, unable to breathe, then rolled onto his back and scuffled up against the wall just behind him. The creature watched him until he reached the wall, at which point it walked toward him and looked down at him as if judging him, lying there helpless. It then stomped on his shin, snapping the bone. Tears began to stream down Andrew's eyes. The pain was so intense, he thought he was going to vomit. Andrew, now incapacitated, had nowhere to go, no way to fight. The creature placed its foot on his stomach, pressing down, ripping into his flesh with its long, dirty toenails. With the creature's foot so completely inside his stomach, Andrew started to cough up blood. Tears streamed down his face. He passed out from the pain, and then passed away. The creature loomed over what was now his bloody corpse. It descended its face towards Andrew, then tore away a bloody piece of flesh from his chin, dislocating one side of its jaw in the process. The creature continued to tear and eviscerate Andrew's corpse until everything it could stomach had been devoured. It then left, calmly, silently, with a pure and deep hatred in its heart. It departed the same way it had come in, through the broken patio door. Another perspective on Bob. Hey guys, normally creepy shit doesn't happen to me, despite living in the weird New Jersey. I guess I can't really say that anymore, considering I've had the worst frigging week of my life. In a way, I brought all of this on myself, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Since I've lurked for so long, it's only fair I tell you guys what happened. So a week ago, my birthday, I just turned 18 and decided I wanted to screw around and look for ghosts. I would have hung out with my friends, but I wasn't in the mood to be a third wheel. If only I just sucked it up and dealt with it. Instead, I shoved my phone and my flashlight in my hoodie pocket and snuck out the back door. I really didn't expect to find much, or I would have brought a proper weapon with me. I guess it's sort of dumb to think about it in retrospect. I remember glancing at the clock. It was around 11 or 12 at night when I left. It was pretty dark because there was no moon. I figured if I was going to see anything cool, it was going to be now. Now, I wasn't just walking around the forest, herpa-derping. There's actually a pretty sketchy cemetery about 10 minutes up the road from my house that's been around for the past couple of 100 years. It's also a spot that practices green burial, where they, put the bodies in a biodegradable casket and send it on its way in the dirt. Well, my uncle owns a plot of land the cemetery is built on, and being the cheap bastard that he is, most bodies buried there end up thrown in there by themselves. I figured there must be some kind of ghost pissed off about having such a shitty resting place who roams around the cemetery at night. I guess I was thinking I could point him to where my uncle lives and start a haunting, just for shits and grins, Probably doesn't work that way, but I wasn't expecting to find something anyway. I finally made my way there and was about to go through the gate to the cemetery when I saw some kind of gray-colored guy thing in the nature trail next to the cemetery. And yeah, I shit you not, my uncle thought it was a great idea to put a nature trail next to the cemetery. I'm a little nervous at this point because I can't think of anybody other than me crazy enough to go out in a place like this at night. There isn't even a car around, so whoever this was, they must have walked there, just like I did. I shouted out at the dude, thinking maybe it was some stoner smoking or another ghost hunter. They didn't say anything. All I could hear was this sickly sound of wheezing. Thought maybe they needed help and were out of breath from running away from something, so I took a deep breath and started walking down the trail. I whipped out my flashlight to light up whoever was down there, only to stop dead in my tracks. Whatever the thing was, it didn't have any arms or clothes on. Basically, I noped right out of there, ran the whole way home, and locked every door in my house. My mom was pretty pissed that I snuck out, and figured I was on a bad trip when I told her about some naked no-arm thing stalking the cemetery. Now, I don't blame her, but I wish she'd believed me or at least humored me so I could carry around one of those Rambo knives that she collects. I was pretty shaken up. This freak of nature had to know where I lived because I didn't run that fast. Still, I rationalized with myself. I didn't see the guy behind me, and I didn't hear that horrible wheezing sound, so I decided I shouldn't worry about it. A couple of days later, I was sleeping normal again, till I saw that thing. My front door was open, so my dog could go in and out as he pleased. Her name's Piggy, and she's an inside dog, but house-trained, so She'll go outside when she needs to use the bathroom. Dogs always have a place they like to go, and her spot was smack dab in the middle of a field in front of my house. Piggy ran outside, and a few minutes later, I heard her barking. I was a little confused because she normally never barks, so I figured there must have been a stray cat around or something. I got up to assess the situation. That damn thing was standing in the middle of the field, fixated on my dog. He had a toothy grin on his face, and the little teeth in his mouth looked as if they were about to rot out. He was completely hairless and gray all over, with tiny, squinty eyes. I started screaming, making any kind of noise necessary to distract him from eating my dog, who during all of this was frozen in her tracks. His eyes darted up to me, and we had this staring contest for what seemed like hours, but I'm sure it was only a few minutes. He broke my gaze and, I shit you not, began peeing on my dog. It wasn't yellow or clear, but a disgusting pea green that coated my dog's fur. It was viscous, like snot. It had this horrible acrid smell, similar to sulfur, I guess. I have no clue what it was, but it was on my dog, and that couldn't have been a good thing. At this point, I grabbed a kitchen knife and started running towards the thing. He stopped peeing and wheezed away. I wouldn't pursue him, but I was just thankful he hadn't eaten my dog. Peeing on her wasn't the greatest alternative. I put on some rubber gloves and grabbed my lilac doggy shampoo to hose her down. Piggy normally doesn't like baths, but I'm sure she was happy to get that stuff off of her. I went to bed a few hours later, but not before locking all the doors again. I wasn't taking any more chances with this thing. I didn't know what to do about him that night, so I just decided to sleep on it. Now, normally my dog sleeps with me, but that night I never felt her climb up next to me. The one time I woke up, it seemed as if she was just staring off into the distance. My mom was crying, telling me there was something wrong with her. The dog was wheezing, and I instantly remembered that no-arm thing pissing on her the other day. But I shook it from my memories pretty quick to tend to my dog. I remembered she had this sad look in her eyes, and she wouldn't drink any water or even eat meat. It was scary, and I sped to the vet, who referred me to the hospital, who had her there overnight. Apparently, she had contracted doggy pneumonia in the middle of summer. About $1,100 in vet bills later, Piggy drove home with me the next day in a horrible thunderstorm. I pulled up in my driveway, and what do you know? That thing was standing right in the middle of it, just staring at me like a deer caught in headlights. I knew this was my chance. No more screwing around. I floored my car and drove right at him, saw his eyes widen to full circles. Next thing I knew, he jumped up on my car, then off again, then full-on sprinted off into the woods. I missed him. The one shot I had to kill him, and I missed him. The past couple of days, I haven't really slept. All I can think about is that creature. I've never heard of something like that before, and he doesn't seem as dumb as I thought he was. I know he's planning his next move, and I'm scared of what this thing might be planning for me or my family. I don't really know what to do. I've gotten about 10 hours of sleep the whole week, and I know I'm not going to be able to keep it up soon. I'm scared to close my eyes, scared that as soon as I do, he'll be back in my room, doing God knows what. Does anybody have any experience with a creature like this? I can't stay awake forever. The house was a small, two-story affair, with white siding on the bottom floor and gray shingles on the top. 3 windows were facing the street, a large picture window, a small rectangular one above that, and another large window below it. I got out of my car and walked towards the door, knocking twice before it opened. A woman stood there, wearing a blue dress with her hair tied back in a bun. She had bright green eyes that seemed to sparkle when she saw me standing outside her house. "Hello," she said cheerfully. Her voice was soft, but carried well through the night air. "Hi, are you Miss Tanner?" She nodded. "Yes, I am." She smiled again and stepped aside so I could enter the house. It smelled odd inside. Not bad or anything like that, just strange, like old books and dust. Please come in. I entered her living room. It wasn't much more than a couch and a coffee table, an end table with a lamp on it. That's all I really needed for a place to sleep. The walls were painted yellow, which looked nice against the dark furniture. The carpet was black and covered most of the hardwood floors. There was a small kitchen off to the side of the living room with a sink, a stove, and a fridge. Everything was clean and tidy. Sorry for the mess, she said, while pointing to some boxes stacked in the corner. My husband died last year, and I just haven't had the time to get around to moving everything yet. No problem. I don't mind sleeping in a bit of mess. She chuckled. Well, if you want to put your things away, feel free. Just make sure not to take too long, since I have to leave in a few hours. Okay, thank you. You're welcome. I'll be right back. She disappeared down a hallway. As I looked around the room, I noticed something else odd about the house. The walls weren't straight. They bulged outward here and there like they'd been pushed from the inside out by someone, pushing their way through them. It was subtle enough that it didn't bother me at first, but as I looked closer, I realized that it wasn't just the walls. Every single surface in the entire house had these little imperfections, including the ceiling and the floor. I heard footsteps coming down the hall and turned to see Miss Tanner returning with 2 glasses filled with water. She handed me one and took a seat on the couch across from me. So, what brings you out this way? She asked as she sipped her drink. I'm looking for a friend of mine. He went missing in the area about a month ago. Oh, that's dreadful. What happened? He just vanished. I paused as I thought about how to explain. He was staying in an abandoned hotel nearby and never came back. We think he might have gotten lost in the woods. She shook her head sadly. That's awful. Is there any chance he survived? Maybe ran away somewhere? I don't know. I hope so. She sighed heavily and leaned back on the couch. I'm sorry. I wish I could help you find him. We sat quietly for a few moments before she spoke up again. I don't mean to pry, but are you sure he isn't still alive? Maybe he's hiding somewhere or something. Well, maybe, I said hesitantly. Do you have any idea where he might have gone? I'm not sure, but I have a hunch. She laughed softly and shook her head. Well, let me know if you hear anything about him. I'll keep my ears open as well. Thanks. I better get some sleep now, I said, standing up from the couch. Of course. I'll show you to your room. I downed the glass of water and placed it on the table. Even that seemed crooked. Thanks again for letting me stay here. You're more than welcome. Please feel free to use anything in the kitchen if you need anything. I will. I followed her down the hallway to a staircase leading to the second floor. At the top of those stairs was another hallway that led to 3 doors, one on each side and one at the end. She pointed to the door on the left. That one's yours. No one else is staying this weekend, so other doors will be locked. She opened the door to my room and flicked a light switch. There was a dresser opposite the bed with a window above it, and a small bed with a nightstand next to it. The wall behind the bed was covered in posters of famous horror movies, slasher flicks mostly. This should be all set up for you. She motioned towards the bed. Make yourself comfortable. My room is on the 3rd floor if you need anything. Thank you. I'll keep that in mind. She walked over to the door at the end of the hall and closed it behind her before disappearing into her own room. I took a look around my room before lying down on the bed. The sheets were clean and smelled nice, but I couldn't tell whether they'd been washed recently or not. As I got under them, I noticed something strange about them. They felt heavy, like they were weighted down on one side. When I tried to lift them up, they wouldn't budge. I rolled over on my back and pulled at them, but still no give. Something was definitely wrong with this place. I lay there staring at the ceiling for a while before drifting off into a deep but restless sleep. I woke up sometime later to a knocking on the other side of my door. I sat up and rubbed my eyes before standing up from the bed. Who is it? I called out, walking over to the door. There was no answer. I unlocked the door and cracked it open. It was dark outside, but the moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I stepped out into the hallway and saw nothing except darkness. "Hello?" I called again, but once again there was no response. "Is someone there?" I asked as I turned around slowly. I heard another knock from behind me, and spun around only to catch sight of Miss Tanner standing in the doorway to her room. Her hair had fallen loose from her bun and hung down past her shoulders. She was wearing a white tank top and blue pajama pants with red stripes down them. She looked like she was trying to hide herself by covering her face with her hands, which were pressed against her cheeks. Miss Tanner? She didn't say anything, continuing to stare at me with wide eyes. "Are you okay?" I asked as I approached her. She nodded, but kept her head down. What's happened?" I asked as I reached out to touch her shoulder. She flinched away from my hand and backed up until she hit the wall behind her. Then, without saying a word, she ran down the hallway and disappeared into the shadows. I stood there for several seconds, dumbfounded by what had happened. What the hell had I just witnessed? Was it real? Or was it just one of those dreams or hallucinations brought on by stress or exhaustion? I went back inside my room and locked the door behind me. I grabbed my phone from my pocket and checked the time. It was after midnight. I'd been asleep for hours. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the poster of Friday the 13th hanging on the wall above the desk. Why would Miss Tanner act like that? And why would she try to hide from me when I touched her? It made no sense. I sighed heavily and laid back down on the bed. I wanted to go back to sleep, but I knew I couldn't fall asleep now. Not until I figured out what was going on here. Maybe if I waited long enough, she'd come back out and explain herself. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because suddenly I was shaken awake by someone pounding on the door. "Wake up!" I jumped up from the bed and opened the door to find Miss Tanner standing in front of me, with her hands balled into fists at her side. "What's wrong?" "Get dressed. You have to leave right now," she said frantically as she began to pace back and forth. "Why?" "You don't know how dangerous this place is. Get your things and get out, now." "What are you talking about?" She stopped pacing and looked me dead in the eye. "The house is cursed." "What?" "It's haunted. There are spirits in this house." I laughed nervously and shook my head. "There aren't any ghosts here." "Then what do you call that thing you saw earlier tonight?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied. Was she talking about herself? "I'm not leaving until I get some answers." "Please, just go. If you stay here much longer, something bad will happen to you, just like your friend." "My friend?" "Just go," she yelled. She started running downstairs. "Wait," I shouted after her, but it was too late. She was already halfway up the steps before she turned around and glared at me. "Tell me what happened." "He died," she said simply. "How?" "They got him." "Who?" "The monsters." I blinked at her and tried to process what she was telling me. "Monsters?" "Yes, the monsters. They came through the walls and they took him away." "Are you insane?" I screamed at her. "There's no such thing as ghosts or monsters." She frowned at me and shook her head. "There are more things than just that." Then she pointed to the floor below us. "You need to leave right now before they come for you next." "I can't leave. My friend might be here somewhere. He could still be alive." She let out a frustrated sigh and walked over to the window. She pushed aside the curtains and looked outside. The moon was bright enough that I could see everything clearly. I followed her gaze out the window and saw nothing except for darkness. She pulled open the window and leaned out into the night air. "He's leaving," she called out into the darkness. I heard a low growl coming from what sounded like inside the walls. Miss Tanner slowly backed away from the window. Then, without warning, she fell backwards onto the ground. Her body hit the floor with a sickening crunch and didn't move again. I stood there, staring at Miss Tanner's broken form lying on the floor for several seconds, before turning around and sprinting down the stairs. The whole house began to creak and moan, and it appeared as if the walls were closing in on me. I ran past the kitchen and the living room, both of which appeared to be untouched, and headed towards the front door. The only light came from the moon shining through the windows of the hallway. As I approached the exit, I felt something grab hold of my shoulder and pull me back. I spun around quickly to see a figure standing in the shadows behind me. It was tall and thin, with oily skin and long black hair. Its face was covered by a mask made of human bones. I struggled against its grip, but couldn't break free. The walls looked as if they were melting, and more human bone-masked faces were emerging from all around me, surrounding me on all sides and closing in on me until I couldn't breathe. I reached out to touch one of them, but only grabbed hold of empty air. Then suddenly, I was dragged back through the walls, felt myself descending into that pitch-black abyss beneath me. I woke up gasping for breath and sat right up in bed. My heart was racing and my body was soaked with sweat. There was a loud bang on the door and I jumped out of bed. I unlocked the door and opened it slightly, just enough to see who was knocking. But when I did, I wasn't surprised to see Mrs. Tanner standing there with her hands balled into fists at her side. "Get dressed. You have to leave right now." I don't have much time, so if things sound a little weird, just bear with me. This is a warning. If you see black clouds at all, just run. Doesn't matter where you are. I don't know if this thing is spreading. I'm getting ahead of myself. On April 5th, my wife and I took off for a wedding in Vermont. Before we left, we heard the news talk about a big northeastern storm that's going to drop a bunch of snow and ice. Even though it looks like we're going to be okay since our plane is landing technically in New Hampshire, just south of the storm. The flight was 2 hours, but about halfway through the trip, the clouds started to change color. Not gray like you'd expect. Darker. More like black. Looking more like volcanic ash clouds than normal storm clouds. My wife was busy playing her Nintendo Switch, but since I was laid off, I had a lot on my mind. I was a little surprised that nobody else noticed it, but off in the distance, I could have sworn I saw something move in the distance. It was hard to tell. It sort of looks like a wing swooping through the clouds, like a fish that makes 180s at the surface. The pressure wake pushed the clouds outward, like something was coming and then changed its mind. It had to be a trick of the eye, probably. It had to be the sun hitting and reflecting away off the ash clouds. I shouldn't have been assuming they were ash clouds, but time proved me right. The pilot never made any announcement, and I didn't really see anything either, so I kept my mouth shut. Maybe if I hadn't, things would have turned out different for Courtney. When I looked away, I happened to catch one of the flight attendants staring at her. Her head slightly tilted, and she wouldn't take her eyes off of me. It sounds strange, but it felt like she was waiting to see if I was about to tell my wife what I had seen. I decided to keep looking busy, and even decided to shut my eyes for a few minutes. Thinking she had just seen something might distract the old veteran stewardess's attention. It had to be about 10 minutes because I listened to my favorite song twice and another song before opening my eyes. And to my shock, she was still looking at me. Now, her teeth looked different, like she was trying hard to smile. I swear it looked like her gums were bleeding. I decided to get up and go to the bathroom, the one farthest from her. That must have done the trick, because when I came back, she had moved on to her normal duties of serving passengers. When I got back, my wife finally noticed the black clouds, but by this time we could barely see past the wing. Did the pilots see anything? Not wanting to worry her, I assured her they have all kinds of communications and radar. Even if they can't see in front of them, they know where they're going. She gave me a look. Courtney was like that. She could see right through me like an MRI machine. The fasten seatbelt sign came on, and with it, the pilot's voice. "Attention travelers, we'll be making our final descent momentarily. Please make sure all loose items are stored, as you won't be needing them." What's that mean? That was weird. I looked around, and thankfully, someone else, who I would shortly find out was our air marshal for the flight, stood up and headed for the cockpit, his face a mask of concern. He shut the drapes behind him, so no one could see him. I heard him knocking loudly and asking to be let in. Just then, the stewardess from earlier rushed by me, running against my arm. Suddenly, my arm was in drastic pain. I looked down, and it looked like someone had taken a cheese grater to it. My wife looked to try and help me. "Oh, God, are you okay? What happened?" I told her I wasn't sure and started pressing dirty paper towels and Skittles wrappers on my wound to stop the bleeding. My wife yelped for help. Other people started looking, and in the confusion, nobody else saw the air marshal struggling, except me, as he was pulled into the bathroom by the stewardess. Except she now looked more like a demon, with black scales on the forearms of her lethal hands and sharp claws. There was panic on the man's face, or maybe it was pain. I don't know. Just as the door shut, I could see the man's skin turning red as if it were being burned off by a torch, or whatever that thing pretending to be a stewardess was. Before I could tell anyone to look, the air marshal disappeared into the airplane bathroom. By this time, my wife had noticed my face and looked up front, but she didn't see anything. "Are you okay?" I tried to tell her something. It took the air marshal, but she just looked at me in confusion. And that was when the gunshot rang out in the cabin. The bullets began flying out of the bathroom from where the air marshal had been dragged. His screams were guttural. He must have gotten loose, but he never made it out. More bullets went off, and everyone scattered. Several shots hit the cockpit, and luckily they didn't penetrate the bulletproof door. Unfortunately, one of the bullets did shoot out the pressurized windows. The next few minutes were a blur. Everyone was panicking, and with no direction, everyone braced for the inevitable. I looked out the window just as we were about to hit. We were through the clouds, and what I was seeing wasn't New Hampshire. It looked like some kind of hellscape. Lava rivers and large mounds in the distance, horned monstrosities roaming the outskirts of the airport. The barbed wire fencing that lay more like fences made from rubber or skin, and the buildings were covered in ash and strange demonic symbols. After that, it was only blackness. I came to eventually, hanging and nearly falling out of my seat. I appeared to be only a few feet off the ground, and I was alone. My wife's seat was broken clean off. I can't see her, and I don't see anyone else living. I prepared myself and unlatched the seatbelt. I tucked and managed to save my 33-year-old ankles when I hit the ground. I stood up, letting my bearings hit me, when I finally got a look around and noticed there was no sun. It should have been there. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but it looks like midnight out there. Alone and scared, I tried calling out, but I was afraid to draw the attention of those giant monsters I'd seen just before the crash. Just then, I heard a girl screaming. Instinct kicked in, and I ran to help. I jumped over the debris and body parts from the passengers. All I could think was that it might be Courtney, and I had to do something. I rounded one of the plane engines that was on fire, and I wish I didn't see what I had witnessed next. An early 20s Gen Z girl covered in dirt, her face cut and badly bleeding. So bad I couldn't tell if she still had her eyes. But then the worst of it finally hit me when I realized what she was doing. She was feeling for her legs, or her lack thereof. She cried out, screaming for her mother, while she grabbed at the stumps of what had been her legs. I have to admit I was scared. I was in shock. How could I help her? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't let her suffer alone. I took a step when suddenly I heard another woman, but this one wasn't screaming. She was laughing. Suddenly, a beautiful, terrifying demon woman walked around the corner, and with her came 2 tiny, crawling demons. "Oh, my child, save your screams. We're just getting started." With that, she snapped her fingers, and I watched as the demons tore into the poor girl. Her screams drew more of the demon dogs. "The more you despair, the more you will suffer. Embrace the suffering, and you will be released from it." The girl cried as best she could as the monster tore into her throat, but with one last breath, she must have gave her what the demon wanted. Suddenly, they were surrounded in black smoke and disappeared. The demon dogs, the demon woman, and the girl, all gone. I was left alone among the debris, the death, the ash-filled air. I didn't know what to do. I found a place to hide. I thought this was hell. Found out later, it wasn't. After having a breakdown under the debris of the crashed plane and still having no idea if my wife was even alive, I had this weird feeling that I had to keep going. It just kept saying, keep alive, keep moving. I can hear those demon dogs coming. I need to be fast. Sometime after my encounter, I heard something loud and deep. It was familiar somehow, though. It sounded like an engine, a plane. I ran through piles of debris and burning cars, planes, cruise ships, and buses. I got to the top of the debris mound just in time to see a 747 punch through the clouded barrier. This one landed just like it was supposed to. I looked up and noticed flying demons scattering as the plane hooked the terminal gate. Just then, the hundreds of demons surrounding the tarmac shrieked like they were welcoming something. Just then, from a shadowy hole in the ground, a giant snake erupted. The giant snake-like creature slithered around the plane like a boa constrictor, preparing to suffocate its prey. The doors opened, and immediately I could hear people screaming for their lives. I watched as a humanoid demon dressed like a pilot in a torn uniform, with random horns tearing its suit of skin off. It was like it was wearing a costume. It started throwing passengers off the plane. Demon dogs and other emaciated humanoid demon things began to swarm the passengers. A middle-aged man in a $5,000 suit, he screamed as the creatures tore his clothes off and he was carried into the main terminal. He swung his suitcase like a weapon. Just before he disappeared, one of the smallest humanoid demons jumped up and bit down on his wrist, stopping him from injuring any of the rest of them with that metal suitcase. I could hear him scream even louder, begging for help and to be let go. Before he vanished into the terminal, I saw the little demon tear the guy's hand off. Was that where they took Courtney, I wondered? I navigated my way inside. I don't know why. I put myself through these sights of something in me just kept demanding that I move forward. Like I had to see it. I watched as all the passengers from the plane, buses, the people who had just got lost on car rides ended up here. They were sorted onto paths that were surrounded by barbed wire. Come on, you meat sacks, it's time to get sorted out. Which one of you is one of us, and which one of you is for the meat grinder? One of the sick-looking demons with a sharp pike yelled at these poor souls, shuffling them through the giant rotating spikes, just like TSA instructing passengers to go through security. Demon guards pushed each person towards the front of the line, where a larger demon would look at each person to classify them. Aviation, infantry, necrotics, this one has spirit. Training pits, we'll beat that out of you, or we'll eat you. The guy looked like a soldier type. Broad shoulders, tattoos, looked like someone from a movie, with the army guys in Benghazi. One by one, people were chosen for roles in Hell's forces. As far as I can tell, there was a small percent of prisoners that the demons didn't want anything to do with, which I thought was pretty weird. Wouldn't everyone make a good soldier? I never got my answer. One of the flying demons landed near the ventilation duct I was hiding in, and I needed to sneak away. I made my way through the vents. To my relief, nothing was in there with me. At least nothing that ever found me. Eventually, I found my way to the airport authority office. It looked guarded. Several bear-type looking guys and big old demons that guarded the door. Using the vents, I quietly snuck in and found what appeared to be a map with some demon casting a spell over the airport. On the giant omnidirectional map, I could see a bubble around the airport. At first I thought it was hiding this place. Whatever that thing in the airport authority office is, it's how they're cloaking the airport, and the demons are building an army with our own people. I don't know how, but somehow in this office I have signal. Maybe it's how no one knows this place is gone. I don't know. I don't know anything up until an hour ago. I didn't even believe in hell. If anyone gets this message, you need to tell everyone about this demon cloaking this place. If it's something more than turning people into demons, I don't know, but we have to save these people. Every plane that lands is either adding more soldiers to the enemy ranks or enslaving more innocent souls. The worst part is, the planes are leaving. Who's on them? I don't know, but they can't be human. I'm going to keep exploring. I can't explain this feeling, but something is telling me that Courtney's not far. I'm going to find out as much as I can and come back here to relay what I can. This has to be the start of something. I don't know where to start this. It's hard to really put it into words just how shocking this event has come off to me. I guess the best place to start would be to explain what happened. When I was around 10, I had a loving dog named Jocko. He was a husky, and we would go for walks almost every day. One day, however, his rope snapped. He must have seen a squirrel or another small animal and ran off into the woods to chase it. I remember running home in hysterics and explaining what had happened to Dad. He yelled at me, but eventually he went out to his truck and went to go find him. He was gone for about 5 hours, and when he came back, I could tell from his red face and his angered expression that he hadn't found Jocko. Even though I could tell he wasn't coming home, I attempted to ask him if he found my loving dog. "Dad, did you find Jack?" I was immediately slapped in the face and sent off to my room to bed. I was crying into my pillow all night. Jocko was an amazing dog. I'd never loved something more until the night he ran off. I remember his bright red collar with a brass pendant labeled J.O. It had a little dog paw print above his initials. Fast forward to now, I'm 55 years old, and I've been working as a dentist for the last 21 years. I was going outside to collect the mail when I heard the sound of barking and twigs snapping. That was when I remembered Jocko. God, it had been so long since I thought of him. My heart was aching as I went inside and read through my mail. I spoke to myself as I went through all of it. Bill, more bills. Finally, the last envelope revealed itself. The paper was trimmed yellow, clearly signifying how old it was. It had an old red wax stamp that had been burdened with time. It was slightly chipped. I read the date on the envelope, 1978. I was confused. I decided to open it and was amazed to find a letter from my grandpa. Grandpa had died long ago when I was about 17. When I read the letter, each sentence made me feel more like crying than the last. "Hey, Felix, I'm really sorry about Jocko. He was a good boy. I'm sure he'll come back to you someday. He's probably out there chasing squirrels. I hope this letter reaches you and doesn't get stuck in processing or any of that. Sincerely, Grandpa." The last sentence broke the somber mood as I chuckled to myself. The irony of the situation, lightening my day as I started to get ready for work. I checked my phone, 6:34 a.m. I had work in about half an hour, so I went to get some coffee ready while I went to the bedroom. As I walked into my room, I was greeted with a sight that made me feel at home. My bedroom reminded me of my childhood. The ugly old wallpaper, the yellow-stained tiles, the amazing smell of mustiness greeting me like a warm embrace. I was happy here. As I was getting ready, I heard more barking. I recognized it. I couldn't pinpoint how exactly, but something about it was familiar. As I finally walked out of my bedroom, I stopped in my tracks. I realized what it was and recognized the sound. It was Jocko. It was the same high-pitched, mellow bark that I recognized from my childhood. I immediately rushed out my door. I ran to the back of the house. I frantically rounded the corner to see my childhood best friend lying in the dirt. Immediately, two details popped into my head, which made me happy and confused. I had moved around 700 miles away from my childhood home. And two was, when Jocko ran off, he was around 5 years old. Dogs don't live that long, I thought. Maybe this was a different dog that sounded and looked like Jocko. That thought was immediately disproven as I noticed the bright red collar and the brass pendant around his neck. I ran up to him, and He didn't even seem fazed. He started to groan as I looked at the pendant. The initials read J.O. My hands were shaking so violently, it looked like I was having a seizure. I immediately embraced my long-lost best friend, but something felt wrong. He was way too cold, even for the early morning weather. I sort of flinched, but I didn't care. I hugged him so tightly, I felt my body ache. Finally, I got up and let him inside. He moved weirdly, almost like he was drunk. I chalked it up to his extreme old age, but I noticed how the collar seemed pristine. I immediately called into work and explained how I wasn't going to make it because I wasn't feeling good. As I stood there on the phone, I noticed how my dog kept on bumping into things. Again, I thought it was old age. I couldn't believe I'd found Jocko after all these years anyway. The sleepless nights I had endured over his disappearance. I couldn't help but tear up as I hugged him again. That's when I noticed. Jocko's eyes had turned a brown color. I very vividly remembered him having sapphire blue eyes. In fact, it was such a prominent feature that we nicknamed him Bluey at the time. I was shocked. I didn't know how to react. My emotions were a mixture of curiosity, confusion, and fear. I sort of just stared at him as I analyzed his face. Everything about it seemed crooked. It was like he had slowly morphed. I noticed patches of dark fur I hadn't seen before. His snout seemed more jagged, but the biggest detail was his teeth. They seemed way too sharp and narrow for a dog. I hadn't even seen that in wolves. I sort of pondered as I went to get him food and water. Everything raced through my mind at once. Thoughts like, that's not your dog, or how did he get here? I was so confused, I felt almost dazed as I brought the dish of foul-smelling dog food and tap water to Jocko. I sat it down and watched as his previously sloppy demeanor changed into a fast, focused strut. He elegantly waltzed over to his meal and proceeded to devour it within seconds. "Must be hungry, huh, Jock?" I said sarcastically. That joking mood changed into something serious as he glanced from his food and stared right at me. He was looking into my eyes as I glanced at him. As odd as it sounds, his eyes seemed human. I can't properly put it into words. I looked at him, but right as I was about to look away, he groaned at me. Now I swear to you guys, I heard the word help come from that groan. It was like a whisper traveling into the room. I immediately felt sick as I backed away. I don't understand why I decided to do what I did next, but some people make mistakes in a moment of quick thought. I decided to keep Jocko with me. I thought, all of this is just stress. None of this is serious. You probably just heard something. I really had no clue what was about to happen, though. Because I didn't have work that afternoon, I decided that finishing up my basement would be a great idea. I'd been working on this thing for 5 months, and it was a perfect man cave. Hardwood floors, a massive TV, felt like a perfect hangout place for someone like me. I even had a vintage Atari sitting there to relive my childhood passions. As I slowly crept down the steps, each creak and groan and crack making me feel nervous. I was still quite shaken up from Jocko's sudden appearance, and I had to think for a good minute about what to do. You obviously can't just take in an enormous husky after years and years of not owning a dog. I started to remember how long it had been since I'd seen him last. 1978? That was simply not possible. It was 2023, and that meant that Jocko would be 50 years old. I started to think, what if this was a completely different dog I just brought in? What if he's completely rabid? I started to worry as I shifted damp cardboard boxes in the basement. Each shift made me flinch as I heard the familiar sound of paws stomping on hardwood. I listened as Jocko slowly walked down the wooden stairs. I turned around to see him. His tongue was hanging out. I saw black viscous liquid on his tongue, and I almost gagged. The room was filled up with a pungent odor. Think of roadkill that's been left to rot in the sun. I started to gag even harder as I watched Jocko take very slow steps towards me. It reminded me of a wolf silently approaching its prey. Then I saw the collar, and all previous thoughts of this being a different dog were wiped away. In awe, I watched as he drove me into a corner. Jocko, calm down, boy. It's me. It's Felix. I watched as he perked his head to the side. His ears twitched. That's a good boy. Every word I spoke felt like a challenge. It was actually hard to think. I was so worried about him going crazy, I didn't even notice the silence. There were no more birds fluttering or calling. No more insects or bees. Hell, not even the wind was swaying. It felt hopeless. I didn't know why I dismissed the smell or the black liquid that was on my once beloved dog's tongue. I was just worried about being bitten. I stretched my hand after a bout of thought and began to slowly stroke him. Even though he was clearly old and he'd been outside for decades, his fur still felt the same. It was incredibly smooth. It felt like silk was caressing my hands. I watched as he began to calm down. I finally walked past him and led him up the stairs. I was contemplating calling a vet. After a few minutes of thinking, I decided that it was for the best. Hell, what if Jocko had rabies and he bit me? I shook the thought off and rang up our local vet. After a few minutes of discussing, we decided on an appointment for tomorrow. I sighed. Even a day with Jocko felt like torture. I was actually surprised. After so many years of missing and begging for my dog to come back, I was now contemplating making him go away. Eventually, it fell dark, and the feeling of tiredness swiftly overtook me. I got ready for bed and decided to check up on Jocko before I went to sleep. As I quietly tiptoed down the stairs, each step making me feel more on edge, that was when I heard a very distinct sound. It was like something wet slapping a hard surface. I could hear the echoes. It was coming from the basement. I felt a sense of dread deep in my stomach as I slowly rummaged to find the door to my basement. I noticed something. The door was wide open. I very slowly began to make my way down the stairs. Every hair on my body started to stand up as I made it to the halfway point. It was cold. I felt my body begin to shake violently as the sound got louder and louder. It was reducing my mind to rubble as I finally made it down. What stood in the corner of my basement was something that would haunt me, even as I lost my memories. Jocko stood there silently on his hind legs. He had something in his mouth. The moon illuminated him through the basement window, and it revealed the blood dripping from his teeth. Finally, I realized what it was. It was the collar of my dog. It had been ripped off of him and still had clumps of fur and parts of it on his neck. It had blood staining it. I immediately looked at this thing's neck and came to a horrible realization. That same collar was on its neck. This was not my dog that stood before me. I let out a yelp, and suddenly there was silence. My mind felt frozen as this thing turned around to see me. Its face was so horribly mangled I could see little bits of mange littering its face like spots of paint. Its eyes were black. I could see my own reflection in them, like a mirror. Then I watched as it dropped the collar, and now presumably my dead dog, as it slowly approached me. It walked like a human. I finally found the courage to get away as I ran. As I made it up the stairs and out the door, that thing chased after me. It slammed into my glass sliding door, making it shatter. It let out a horrible yelp. It stood between me and the only place I could now use as an escape. I did the only thing I could think to do. I ran up the stairs and went into my room. I slammed the door shut and locked it as I began to barricade myself with loose furniture. I ran over to my phone and dialed 911, the feeling of hopelessness and sorrow only slightly fading away as the feeling of another person speaking to me came on the line. 911, what's your emergency? Listen, my dog's gone crazy. I'm in my room right now trying to keep it away. It's somewhere in my house. I don't know where. Please just send help. I heard the sound of shuffling on the other end of the line. All right, sir. Make sure to stay on the line and keep out of sight, okay? Everything's going to be okay. What's your address? The sound of horrible screaming and rummaging began to litter the air like a pathogen as I continued. 178 Mangrove Drive. Please send help. I don't know how much longer I can bear this. That's when I looked out the window. I saw the face of my dog looking at me. I lost my breath almost immediately. Its face began to warp into a human. Its skin was white. It smiled at me. How was it this tall? Oh, God, my dog's looking at me. It wants to kill me. Please send help. Oh, my God. I told these things to the operator as I stared back at the thing. It put its unnaturally slender hand up to its mouth and made a shushing gesture. I screamed, but it didn't last long as I felt the elevating sounds of this thing's horrible chuckle. I felt so alone. It kept on looking at me with its horrible grin, its smile so large as it stretched beyond my window. Then it showed me something that has me crying while I write this. I watched in terror as its hands reached down and pulled something off the ground. It began to pull up a gray fur-covered body. It was Jocko. I could see the red collar on its decapitated body. I began to cry maniacally. Why was this happening? Was this all a dream? Sir, we're 2 minutes away. Hang in there. The voice on the line echoed as a feeling of hope began to fill my body. Something that quickly faded as the thing began to put its hand to my window. I watched as it began to feel around before finally pulling it open. The squeal of the window finally reached the top, and I began to sob. I was ready to accept death. It took the body of my mangled dog and threw it into the room. It landed at my feet, the blood pooling the carpet, making it look like red wine had spilled everywhere. I began to embrace my long-gone friend in my lap as I watched the thing smile at me. I heard it stomp as it began to walk away. I didn't care for my life anymore. I sat there crying and hugging my dead best friend. Jocko, no, I quietly uttered as I held him in my lap. I heard the fading sounds of sirens began to approach as I sat there with my dog. The rest of it's a blur. I woke up in the hospital. I don't know how, but I'd cuts littered all over my body. I thought it was from me hurrying to barricade my door, or the glass from the initial impact of that thing slamming into my sliding door. It's been 2 days now. I'm still in the hospital. I don't know what's happening. My house is being investigated. I might be sent to jail under suspicion of animal abuse and neglect, but I'm not so sure. I love you, Jocko. I wish you'd never ran away. How do I even begin this? I know I'll sound crazy, but I'm not. Please bear with me, no matter how bizarre this may sound. It all started when I was 12. It's almost 9 years ago now. My foster sister Marley and I were riding bikes through the forest near the neighborhood when we fell. I don't know if I hit a rock or my wheel slipped off the trail, but the next thing I knew, I was rolling down a steep slope into a lower part of the forest. I'd felt Marley try to grab onto my hand, but she ended up being dragged down with me. I genuinely thought I was going to die, and Marley did too, with the stones and the branches cutting and bruising us as we fell. It felt like I was going to fall forever, but as I neared the bottom of the slope, I saw something. Some things. 5 pairs of eyes staring at me with such emotion, but I'm still not sure I can figure out what emotion it was. There were no bodies, no faces, just these eyes. They were just eyes. Me and Marley both narrowly missed landing on jagged rocks at the bottom, and when we sat up and looked at each other, we just screamed and burst into tears. She was covered head to toe in blood, scratches, and various injuries, and her skin was almost completely blue and purple, and green, nothing like her usual golden skin tone. She said I was the same, and I could tell by looking at my own hands and legs that she was right. Our clothes were torn and grass-stained, and the dirt stung at our cuts. It wasn't long before we both couldn't see through our tears, but just as the vision began to become clear again, I saw the eyes once more. There were 6 pairs this time, but I blinked and they were suddenly gone. At the time, I was more concerned about my injuries and assumed that I was imagining them, possibly from a brain injury that I had most likely endured when I fell down the hill. So I stood up and dragged my bike out of the woods with Marley following behind me. We didn't say a word until we were back on the street. It was only then that we noticed the blood we'd once been covered in was gone. Our hundreds of deep cuts were now just scratches, and our bruises were minimal too. We were shocked to say the least, and confused, but we were grateful as well. When we entered our house, my mom fussed over us and threw away our torn clothes. I can't imagine how she would have reacted if we'd showed up looking like we did when we reached the bottom of that slope. Over the years, we came to the conclusion that we must have over-exaggerated it in our head, maybe from shock or fear, but we never forgot it. I couldn't forget those eyes either. I know I saw them, and I still do see them. As a teenager, I was a bit of a risk taker. I loved the adrenaline of doing thrilling things, but Marley, not so much. Whenever I did something impulsive or dangerous, I saw the eyes. Each time there'd be one more pair. I've been to the doctor about it. I've talked to therapists. I've had my brain scanned, and they all say I'm perfectly fine. I don't hallucinate other things, and I'm not paranoid. I've learned to ignore them, and the uneasy feeling I get when I see them, and of course, the dreams that I have about them. I say dreams because they weren't really nightmares. Nothing particularly bad or scary happens when I see them, but they always freak me out. I don't tell people I can see them. I know what they'll say. It's not just some creepy story anymore. It sounds psychotic. Yeah, I see these pairs of eyes staring at me sometimes. I'm normal, though. Wouldn't that just, sound a little weird? Recently, however, I had to tell someone. A few weeks ago, there was a fire in my apartment. It had begun in someone else's apartment on the top floor, and I lived on the floor below them. I woke up to the sounds of screaming from outside, and the footsteps of people racing down the stairs in fear. I could already hear the fire engine noises in the distance, and my first thought was of my pets. I managed to pick up my dog and one of my cats and get them to safety, but I had to go back for my other cat. As I searched my apartment shouting, "Sadie," as loud as possible, I started to feel lightheaded. I reached my door, but I had locked myself in when I shut it, and I collapsed when I couldn't unlock it. The last thing I remember seeing before I passed out were those eyes. There were hundreds of pairs, or I guess maybe less, maybe more, I don't know. All I know was I saw them. When I woke up the next day, I was in the hospital. I wasn't burned, I'd just suffered from some minor smoke inhalation. I left the hospital that same day and was completely unharmed. It also turned out Sadie had ran out of the apartment while I was taking the other 2 pets downstairs, so they were all safe. I had had an unusual dream that night, though. It was about the eyes, but this time they were whispering. They had no mouths, no bodies, no faces, but they were all talking to me at once. I was in a forest, surrounded by them, drenched in blood, but as their words grew louder and their stares grew wider, the blood turned into water, and I was suddenly in a warm pool. When I looked around, it seemed like I was in a hot spring, and there were thousands more of them around me. I'd never felt so calm, so relaxed, so safe. It was like heaven, until the heat became too much, and I woke up. I haven't stopped thinking about it. The eyes, the dreams, all of it. Today, I decided to tell Marley. I've been staying at her apartment, which we've discussed as maybe a long-term thing. We both like having a roommate. We were watching TV, I was on my phone, and she was on her laptop when I said, "Hey Mar, can I tell you something, but you have to promise not to think I'm crazy. I've had it checked out, I'm fine, but I really need to tell somebody." She nodded and was visibly intrigued, so I told her. I told her everything, starting from when we were 12 and I saw them for the first time. When I finished talking, she smiled and said, "Dulcie, I don't think you're crazy at all." "You don't?" I replied, relieved. "Nope." "Why not?" "Because," she leaned forward and whispered, staring deep into my eyes, "I see them too."